Everybody, great to have you back here in the fish tank. It's Minion Masters Meta time here. We're going to look at the overall meta. Now, just to clarify, because there have been some questions and confusions regarding this, the only data we have access to is from the leaderboards. We don't have any sort of back-end API access to any play rates, win rates, anything like that. So the best we can do is scrape the leaderboards. I do that every hour. And then we just basically extrapolate that. We can figure that if we see cards played a lot on the leaderboard, then they're good. If they're played a lot at the top of the leaderboard, then they're even better. So that's basically the basis for the data. And then, of course, we look at all sorts of different parts of that to figure out what's the most played master, cards, spells, etc, etc, etc. So we're going to go through a lot as always. I'll try to go through it as quickly as possible. As always, if you need to, make sure you pause the video, screenshot it, whatever, so you can get on top and pay full attention to exactly what you want to. Just a quick thing, YouTube tells me that over 60% of you are unsubscribed, so it'd be awesome if you're enjoying the content here in the fish tank and you want to keep up to date on everything Minion Masters related. Make sure you hit that subscribe button, and only like 6% of you have the bell on, so if you could turn the bell on so you get notified of any of my new videos, that would also be awesome. Bit cringe to ask for it, but if you could do that, would be great. But anyway, let's dive in and start unpicking this data. And of course, if you've been playing this season, you'll know that one of the two new cards, the Wartrack Dreadnought, has been everywhere. Even though it did get a hotfix nerf, it still seems to have been played a lot. But I must say, since the nerf, it's definitely not as bad as it was before. And when I say bad, I mean bad as in good. But it is going to get nerfed again in the next patch. So hopefully that should bring it down into a better place. But currently, because it is so strong, you've got a real impact on the meta where people are playing it or people are playing stuff that's specific against it. And there's not really too much of a middle ground, which makes the meta pretty stale. Right, let's dive in. Master popularity is the first thing we are going to look at. So our overall master popularity. So, APEP, the current overall master of choice, followed by Stormbringer, and in third place, Tronvir. If you look at the graph here, the yellow is 1v1, the red is 2v2 randoms, the blue is 2v2 pre-mades. So, as I said, APEP, Stormbringer, and Tronvir. Last season, APEP was still number one, Tronvir was second, and Stormbringer was third. So, second and third have spun around this season. Right, let's break this down into the different modes and have a look, first of all, at the master popularity for solos. As we go through, you'll see the pie chart on the left is the version 2.3. So, that's last season, so we can compare it to the pie chart on the right, which is this season 2.4. So the blue color, APEP, it's still number one, and it's number one in solos by even further than it was before. Remember, in the last patch, APEP did get a small nerf with regards to the health of the totem. That's affected basically nothing. So APEP's gone up a lot this season. Ratbo's also gone up, which I think is possibly or probably because of the fact that this is a scrat based season, with the two new cards both being scrats. And then if we look at what we've seen decreased, Valorian has dropped off a lot, and I think that's because Valorian was played with Rystar. Rystar is definitely not as good as it was before. Remember, Bulwark in the last patch, the damage reduction was reduced from 50% down to 35%, so Rystar has dropped off a lot, and so has Valorian. Average mana cost still about the same, and if you're new to the game, the average mana cost we're sort of talking about when it comes to building a deck and considering whether it's going to be competitive or not, sort of between 3 and 4.5 at the top end. There's some edge cases where you can be lower or higher, but generally that sort of mana cost, that sort of curve is good. Right, let's have a look at randoms. So Stormbringer is now the number one choice in randoms. Now, Stormbringer does pair pretty well with the Wartrack Dreadnought because it is ranged and it does get that extra range. And one of the things that is going to get nerfed in the next patch is its range, because its current range is just too strong. 8 range and then up to 10 with Stormbringer. So that's definitely had an impact on Stormbringer. So Stormbringer's gone up quite a lot. Well, actually a substantial amount, and is now the #1 played master. Tronvir drops from 1st to 2nd. Apep in there a little bit, but Morelia dropping off quite a lot. Could be potentially because Accursed is not great in the current meta. People tend to play Morelia with Accursed. Right, so and again the average mana cost not really changing. And then finally for our look at the masters, we'll look at the pre-mades. And again 2.3 on the left, Tronvir, Stormbringer and Ratbow. But this season Stormbringer goes up to #1. So Stormbringer's had the biggest increase in play rate. Ratbow also seeing more play, again likely on the back of the general Scrat thing. But one of the things that makes the Wartrack Dreadnought so disgustingly strong is it doesn't require any outside synergy. You know, you just slot it into any decks, which you just see these like normal Accursed decks with the Wartrack slotted in because it doesn't need anything, and it's just so strong that whatever you lose is more than made up for with the Wartrack Dreadnought. Tronvir dropping off a lot in pre-mades, I must say. Last season, as we saw, the most played master, dropping down to only the 3rd played master now. Mordor dropping off quite a lot as well. Right, so that's our look at the masters. Let's carry on and have a look at our rarity composition. Now, not too much generally changes with regards to this. If you're new to Minion Masters, there are 4 rarities: common, rare, supreme and legendary. Doesn't necessarily reflect the strength of the card, it's more sort of the complexity of the card. Common cards are very basic, and then all the way up to legendary cards where they have a lot more sort of unique mechanics. And a reminder, this game is not pay to win, although you could argue that this season it kind of is with the Wartrack Dreadnought. But you can get it for free, but you have to wait until the end of the free pass. But we won't talk about that. But yeah, so you can see that all of the decks generally are comprised of a lot of common cards, rare, supreme, and some legendaries. So don't think you need to have a deck full of legendaries to be competitive. In fact, that's probably the worst thing to do, because they're not going to synchronize well together. Okay, let's have a look at the factions. So there's 9 factions in Mini Masters. And the faction of choice last season was Voidborn, closely followed by Scrats. And this season, it's gone up, and it's massively in favour of Scrats, 25%. Now, this doesn't necessarily reflect faction decks. This just means that Scrat cards are played more often than other factional cards. Definitely influenced by the Wartrack Dreadnought being played by every single person, almost, present company excluded. And just the general sort of Scrat theme of the expansion tends to affect that as well. So Scrat was 2nd, now 1st. So Scrat with the biggest increases, small increases to Outlander and a little bit to Voidborn. Crystal Elf dropping off quite a lot. People not feeling that in the current season. Empyrean dropping off as well, likely to do with that Rise Star nerf for sure. Okay, let's break these down a little bit and have a look at the factions based in each of the game modes. We've got 1v1, 2v2 randoms and pre-mades, and then last season's pie charts underneath. And we can see that Scrat, the red colour, is the #1 faction of choice in all current game modes. Voidborn is the 2nd. So if we look at the increases, Scrat has increased massively in all of the game modes. And of course, when something goes up, something else has to come down. So in solos, Empyrean and Crystal Elf dropped off a lot. In randoms, Crystal Elf and Accursed dropped off a lot. And in pre-mades, Empyrean and Crystal Elf also dropped off a lot. So Scrats kind of everywhere. Right, next up we have a look at wildcards. If you're new to the game, wildcards are kind of weirdly named. A wildcard is a duplicate. In the current 2v2 game modes, you can play... you have 2 wild cards, which allows you to play 3 copies of a single card or 2 copies of 2 cards. Minion Masters purists like myself hate wildcards. There are no wildcards in solos, and from next season, there will be no wildcards in pre-mades. Pre-mades is the mode where wildcards have the most effect. So pre-mades next season, no wildcards, and there will be a restriction of requiring 20 unique cards between the two players, which effectively means no copies of the same card in each deck. So when we look at this meta-analysis wildcard usage for 2.5, we should have no wildcards in solos and no wildcards in pre-mades. I'm looking forward to that. It should make pre-mades way less cheesy, way more competitive. So I'm excited to see that. But let's have a look at what is happening at the moment in 2.4 with regards to wildcards. So we can see, I mean, the majority of people don't, well, I mean, in pre-mades it's kind of changed quite a bit, where the majority of people are kind of wildcarding. You can see the red is people playing 2 wildcards, the orange is people playing 1 wildcard, and the beautiful green is people not wildcarding at all. We could talk at length about wildcards, but let's talk about that in more detail when we get the new changes next season. And of course, don't forget, next season, new bridge rules. I've tried them out on the PTR. Seems kind of interesting. So the change with bridge rules is you can play on them like you could before. You can collision grab like you could before. But there is a 1.5 second timer to neutralize the bridge. So once you're on the bridge, and depending on the particular situation, there's a little graphic that shows you capturing the bridge. So you can't just insta-capture a bridge. It requires a little bit more than that. So it's kind of a middle ground between where we are at the moment and how bridges used to be. So a little bit of a distraction there. We're not talking about wildcards at all at the moment, but the bridges are changing, and I look forward to seeing how that changes with 2.5. Right, let's just have a look at the cards that were wildcarded the most. Of course, it's Wartrack Dreadnought. Why not play multiple copies of an OP as fuck card if you can? So wildcards, OP, Dreadnought. Interestingly, the Razor Squadron's seeing a lot more wildcards there, which is possibly as a good counter to the Wartrack. So that's kind of an example of something being strong, causing something else to get played a lot. Right, so overall, Wartrack Dreadnought is the most wildcarded card, and it's wildcarded twice as much as the second most wildcarded card, which is the Razor Squadron. Right, let's dive into the cards. If you're new to the game, you're going to be asking, like, what Master do I want to play? What cards do I want to play? What Legendaries? What spells and all that stuff? So hopefully this will give you a great idea of what to play, what to craft, and all that kind of good stuff. Okay, so top cards. Guess what's top? Yes, of course it is. Wartrack Dreadnought is top. Second is Bolf, and Bolf has always been kind of strong. It's kind of been very, very strong, very heavily played recently, and will be getting nerfed off the back of that in 2.5. 2.5 is going to be introducing a new keyword, Icebreaker, which is kind of like true damage, but only to frozen targets. So Icebreaker means you do full damage to frozen instead of the regular 50% reduction. So Bolf's going to get that. Bolf is also going to get a special double damage to frozen targets modifier, but that's a specific Bolf-only thing, not a Frost and Icebreaker kind of thing. So he'll be good against frozen targets, but then drop off, which is probably fair, probably makes sense for him. We're also going to see Icebreaker keyword given to Rimagal as well, which makes sense. Nazara as well, again, which makes sense. Okay, so Wartrack Dreadnought, Chief Icebreaker, Bolf, Swarmers are the top 3. Just to give you a very quick rundown of the colour scheme here, if something is green, that means its rank has gone up from last time. So for example, Chief Icebreaker Bolf, the number on the left 2, that's his current rank. The number on the right 25 is his rank from last season. 2 is greater than 25, therefore it's green. Red is the opposite, where something has gone down. White means it's a new card, so we don't have any data from last season, hence the white on the Wartrack Dreadnought, and black means something has stayed the same. Right, so those are the top cards. So if you're looking to build decks, these are of course going to be some good starting positions in your deck. Now, again, going back to the rarities, talking about how you don't have to have legendaries in your cards. If we look at the rarities of these top cards, 13 of them were common, 8 were rare, 4 supreme, and only 2 of them were legendary. The 2 legendary ones are the top 2. But anyway, let's move on. Very quickly here, and you might want to pause the video to put a comment in. There was 1 unused card out of all the all the leaderboard analysis. I think we got 288 cards. Only 1 of them didn't appear at any time on the leaderboard in the data that we looked at. Can you guess what that card was? Pause the video. Let me know in the comments what you think it is. Right. Welcome back, because you unpaused the video and followed the instructions, right? Good job. Okay, next up we're going to have a look at the top cards non-spells. So that means anything that's a minion or a building, basically. Just anything that's not a spell. Because generally when you build a deck, you think, well, I'm going to put 8 minions in, a couple of spells. So it's good to sort of separate them out. And of course, here we're going to look at the different modes as well. We've got solos, randoms, and pre-mates. And of course, the Wartrack Dreadnought is number 1 in all of them. And again, like, it's the overall top played card from our data, and it's played twice more than the second place card, which is Chief Icebreaker Bolf. So the overall top 5 cards: Dreadnought, Bolf, Swarmers, Propeller Scrats, and Elite Swarmers. So you can kind of see a lot of the things in all of the modes. So one of the things that the Dreadnought is so strong is that we've said before how it can fit into any deck without any sort of synergy. So that's why it's everywhere. Also, it can get value in any game mode. You know, sometimes we see things that are way better in pre-mates or randoms compared to in solos, whereas here we can see it's everywhere all of the time. Everything, everywhere, scrap based. So these are the top cards. You can see there's a lot of different types of cards here. We've got some very complicated things, some very simple things. For example, Slitherbound being played a lot. They're going to get a small nerf in the upcoming patch, just to reduce their attack speed. Remember, they apply poison as they go. And things like the Cursebearer we can see in the 2v2 makes more sense, likely to be bigger units, more units to get value out of the Cursebearers there. So in solos, we've seen Propeller Scrats go up quite a lot, Bolf going up quite a lot. Pebble dropping off. Remember, Pebble got changed a little bit in the last patch, lost its decay while it was sitting on the ground, but also got nerfed a little bit. So not too surprised about that. Spell Dancer dropping off. Remember, she was everywhere before. She got a little bit, she got kind of nerfed with her trigger ability going down from 5 sparks to only 3, so that kind of makes sense. We've also seen some reductions to Storm Tamer. He did receive range nerf, I think, in the last patch, if I remember correctly. So it's kind of interesting sometimes to look at the cards that get nerfed, see if they are dropping off, or if the nerf doesn't really change anything. For example, we looked at the APEP being everywhere still, and that's despite APEP getting nerfed. And one of the interesting things is I looked at the data before the hotfix, because remember we had a hotfix a few weeks into the season to specifically fix some issues with the server, but also to nerf the Wartrack Dreadnought. And from looking at comparing the data from before the hotfix to after the hotfix, the play rate for the Wartrack Dreadnought actually went up, even though it had been nerfed, which I think is due to a couple of things. Firstly, it's even with the nerf, it's too strong. That's why it's getting nerfed again. And secondly, of course, the longer into the season we go, the more people have access to the Wartrack Dreadnought via the free season pass. So I think that's why it went up, even though you would kind of expect the opposite to happen. Right, let's have a look at the spells. If you're thinking of including some spells into your decks, this will give you a good idea of what to go for based on the different modes that you're playing in. And Morgrel's Mark has gone up a lot this season. And, you know, that's a spell that will kind of play well with the Wartrack Dreadnought, with the taunt. So not too surprised to see that. Morgul's Mark is getting changed a little bit in the next patch. I'm kind of unsure whether it's a buff or a nerf. I'm pretty sure it's a nerf. They're changing it so it's more of a bug fix, but a nerf bug fix where the swarmers should spawn correctly at the location of the unit, not where you played the spell. So fast moving units, you tend to get the Morgul's Mark swarmers spawning kind of all over the place, grabbing bridges and stuff, which makes it really, really powerful. So it's going to be less about that, more about the swarmers getting actual value on the unit that you play it on, which I like to see that, because that's one of the reasons Morgul's Mark is so strong, is because it's so versatile. Right, so our top 3 spells in solos: Morgul's Mark, Daggerfall, Unholy Ground. Unholy Ground doesn't necessarily mean there's going to be a lot of accursed decks. That's kind of a spell and a curse card that you can use outside of accursed decks. Doesn't have any accursed ascension trigger anymore, and it kind of does some stuff that nothing else really does. So kind of also the same with Restless Dead. It's a nice spell, it's mana banking, doesn't need any sort of accursed build up for it. Okay, so Morgul's Mark and Daggerfall going up quite a lot in solos. Resonating Blast Crystal dropping off a lot. Remember, that did get a nerf, doing 80 instead of 120 initial damage in the last patch. Hypnotize dropping off as well. Which and Ardent Argis, that's going to be, of course, off the back of Rystar being played less because of the Bulwark reduction. Okay, so in solos, Bridge Buddies, Chain Lightning and Bearavalanche are the top 3 spells of choice. When we get in duos, we see more of the spells that can do lots of AoE, where they can get a lot more value than they can in solos. So Blade Star, we see a lot more, Beam of Doom, kind of stuff like that. Chain Lightning going up, that kind of was a very popular spell, dropped off a little bit, still very popular, but it's back. Not stronger than ever, but still pretty damn strong. One of the biggest increases. And the Resonating Blast Crystal has been the biggest reduction in play rate off of all of the game modes. So that's not particularly surprising. So overall, if we combine all the modes together, top spells, Bridge Buddies, Chain Lightning, Unholy Ground, Daggerfall, and Morgul's Mark. And just a thing regarding Blade Star, there is going to be a bug fix with Blade Star next season where currently it can kind of get stuck in a big unit and just destroy it. That's going to be fixed. So all the other ways that it works is going to be normal, but it won't be able to get stuck in some big units. Right, new players are always really excited, really keen to get their hands on some Legendaries, but not all Legendaries are created evil. Evil. I mean, some of them are, but equal. And if you're looking to grab a Legendary, it's always a good idea to think about the kind of deck you want to make and whether the Legendaries fit into it. Some Legendaries are really specific, need a whole deck to support them, and will only work in that kind of deck, whereas other ones you can throw in almost any deck, and they're fine. So whether you want to get the most value out of your Legendary crafting purchase, consider that. And of course, Wartrack Dreadnought is #1, but remember, there will be balance changes in 2.5. Wartrack Dreadnought will be a lot weaker in 2.5. We hope. There's going to be less range and less AoE and various other things that will hopefully make it weaker. The hope is that it doesn't get destroyed. It's still valid. It's still playable. It's just not OP auto-include. Right, so Bolf is second place in solos, but he has the biggest increase. He's gone up a lot. I do wonder how he's going to change in the next season. I think next season we're going to see less Bolf and more Cleaver. Cleaver's not a Legendary, but it feels like when you're including Bolf or a Cleaver, you're like, what? Let's just go for a Bolf. That makes more sense. But with his changes, that could change that a lot. Zhao Long falling out of favour a little bit in solos. Snake Druid as well, and thank God Gax is too. Bolf, as I mentioned, had the biggest increase in play rate for solos, had the biggest increase in play rate for duos in both game modes as well. So he is kind of everywhere. One thing we saw a lot less of this season is the Reckonator, and I feel like that's because the Dreadnought kind of replaces the Reconator in a lot of those decks. You know, it's got that AoE, it's tanky. So if the Wartrek Dreadnought gets nerfed, maybe we'll see more Reconator coming back. Fergus also dropping off quite a lot in pre-mades. Just being replaced by, you know, people just playing both instead. Remember, Fergus did receive quite a lot of nerfs recently. Okay, so Wartrek Dreadnought, the most played legendary by a mile. Right, so we have looked at the Masters and we've looked at the cards. Let's combine them and look at the decks. Now, you can argue what makes a top deck, what makes the best deck. But what I've tried to do here is I ordered the decks based on their position that we find them on the leaderboard. And then also we look at the average ranking of all of the cards in there. And the lower that number is, that kind of means the stronger the cards are. So these are all going to be decks that were found at the top or near the top. And have got lots of highly ranked, lowly ranked, depending on which way you're looking at it, cards. I've also tried to include a selection of Masters so we don't just have 5 APEP decks. And one thing you can see immediately is we've got 4 Wartrek Dreadnought decks here. And the Setsu deck, the 5th deck, is kind of an anti-Dreadnought deck with the ATG drone, the Flightless Dragons. Remember, they get rage if you're behind on health, and they will absolutely murder it as long as they're not tanking it. And, you know, we look at the top deck, we had a look, Wartrek Dreadnought, Chief Icebreaker both. Very strong cards. Morgul's Mark, Daggerfall, very strong spells, Slitherbound, and Propeller Scrat's in there as well. So lots of strong cards for their slots, and together, very, very hard to deal with. Okay, second place, we got the Volko deck. Lots of cards to take advantage of the Rage. Propeller Horde, of course, are going to get triggered when something else has Rage. Dreadnought in there because why not? A nice King Puff deck. Again, lots of DPS and the Dreadnought in there. And then we see a good Ratbow deck with lots of scrap cards, as you would expect. We've got the new Zeppelin Bomber. Remember, that was changed to get the shield, which a lot of people kind of like. It's not as cheesy as it was before, but it can be very strong. Right, so those are top 1v1 decks. Definitely try some of those out if you're looking for a deck and you've got the cards available. You know, some of them are going to be easier to play. We know King Puff is going to be harder to play, really understanding the way that the bridge switches can affect the arena, the setup of the matches. Setsu, I mean, Setsu's got a very, very strong perk 3, but it needs to be played appropriately, and a lot of people play her very wrong. But definitely a strong deck in the hands of good players. Okay, next up we have a look at the top random decks. And a lot of the similar things we see from what we've seen before. We do see things more now, like the Beam of Doom, where it gets a lot more value because, you know, if you're trying to deal with a great big push. Bearvalanche, definitely a very strong spell, Disu's spell of choice. And again, we see the Dreadnought almost everywhere, except the 4th deck, which is the Morelia Accursed Ascension deck. Toll of the Dead, Harmful Souls, Skeleton Crew, which is wildcarded to get the extra value from the Ascension when it is reached. So we've got APEP, we've got Stormbringer as well. Stormbringer just taking advantage. It's basically a cheap cycle Stormbringer deck with 3 Razor Squadrons, which of course are really good at dealing with the current meta with the Wartrek Dreadnought. We do have some other Outliner cards in there to help generate the tech that the Razor Squadrons so desperately need. Again, we have a Setsu with some cheap spells, and of course the top end is just the Dreadnought and both, and then Tronvir with the same kind of thing. Now, interestingly, when we get to the pre-made decks, we don't see the Dreadnought quite so much. It is still there and thereabouts, but only in 2 of the top 5 decks have the Dreadnought. One of them has it wildcarded. Excuse me while I throw up in my mouth. But the decks that are not playing the Dreadnought tend to have a lot of things that are anti-Dreadnought. So Magma Storm is something I've been playing this season and is very, very strong. And a great counter to the Dreadnought, as long as you don't have terrible, terrible luck. Now, the Morelia deck's kind of interesting. Has some counters for the Dreadnought. You know, it's also playing the wild-carded Scrat Launcher, so it's kind of a, let's try to win this match early. And remember, the one thing we have to consider with the pre-made decks is something, this is something we can't easily extrapolate from the data, is a lot of pre-made decks are made to specifically play with another pre-made deck. And on their own, they might not make the most sense, but together they make more sense. So, for example, this Morelia Scrat Launcher deck, we might find that they're pre-made in with someone else with another couple of Scrat Launchers, which of course is something we won't be seeing next season with the no wild cards and the 20 unique cards. So that'll be interesting to see how that affects these kind of players when they actually have to learn to play the game. But yes, so pretty much the same. Wartrack Dreadnoughts or countering the Dreadnought if you don't want to play it. Right, I know we've gone through a lot. We've got a little bit more to go through. But the way we're going to do it is we're going to zip through this. We're going to look at the cards that are most popular for each master. And I'm just going to go through it quickly. And if you want to look at that data in specific detail, then of course just pause it, screenshot it, whatever you want to do, and have a look at it. So we're just going to have a look like this. We've got APEP. We've got the top cards in each of the game modes. One additional thing here to pay attention to, at the bottom we have the number of decks. So this gives you an idea of if this is a sort of a good, well-rounded data source, or if it's a very low-played master that's only built on a couple of decks. Right, so let's go through this quickly. So APEP. Next up we have Diona. And then we have King Puff, Propeller Scrats, Propeller Horde everywhere, as you would kind of expect. Multi-minions. Then we have Milloween. Lots of spells, of course, as you would expect. Solos has a lot of Accursed spells. Not sure how the Accursed decks are doing in Solos at the moment, to be honest. Definitely not as strong as they have been before. They were very strong, then Rystar came, then Wartrack came, and that kind of put a bit of an end to that. Mordar, we're going to see more tanky units, especially in 2v2. In Solos, you can kind of get away with... it might even be better to have the weaker, sort of cheaper units. Next up, we have Morelia. Each game mode we can see here is kind of very Accursed based, as you would expect. You know, it's kind of interesting the way Morelia and Accursed work together, because there is a tiny little bit of synergy. You've got Morelia, her perk 3 does get a buff from the Accursed, but that's from the Accursed Ascension, but that's it. So there's no real reason to play Morelia with Accursed above that, but it's always interesting to see that they do. Right, Wrecked, very aggro. Ratbow, you know, you could guess it's going to be just Scrats everywhere. Ravager, again, it's going to be more aggro. Interestingly to see Lord Sentinel Thelic in there, but it's only based on 23 decks, so quite a small data source compared to some of the other ones. Setsu, again, we're going to have a lot of spells to get that spell synergy at perk 3. Stormbringer, we're going to have a lot of ranged units to take advantage of that perk 2, which of course is going to be, we're going to see a lot of Outlanders, a lot of Crystal Elves in there. Tronvir, I mean, Tronvir doesn't really have any specific deck building sort of synergy. You just play whatever you want. Valorian, you know, we tend to see a lot of Empyrean cards with Valorian. Doesn't have the synergy that it used to, but a lot of the mid-range units really do appreciate that hill. And Volko is the last one here on the list. Just, you know, rage. Just rage stuff. Right. So that is it. That is our look through the meta for 2.4. As I said multiple times, there was a lot that we went through, but of course, if you want to revisit the video, do so, pause it, whatever you need to do to get the best out of it. Hopefully this information is interesting for very experienced players, but additionally useful for newer players, because, you know, we have to remember now that there's 288 cards currently, and, you know, they go up every month. So for new players coming in, you've got 14 masters to learn. You've got 288 cards to learn. You know, where do you start? Hopefully this gives you a great idea of, you know, just strong stuff to start with, good stuff to learn. You know, ultimately you want to learn everything. If you're going to master the game, you need to know everything that's going on. But yeah, so as always, if you're enjoying the content here in the Fish Tank, make sure you hit the subscribe button and turn that bell on. Give it a thumbs up if you've enjoyed it and found this content useful. And if you want to get involved in a discussion of any sorts, let me know in the comments. How are you feeling about these things? And again, as a reminder, this data is based on the leaderboard, so outside of the leaderboard things might be different, but it's always interesting to hear from you if you're experiencing something that's very different to what we see here. Okay, 2.5 is coming soon. June the 24th, I believe, is the date for 2.5, which is going to be a Monday. So it's kind of a different schedule, but there are reasons behind it. So let's look forward to that. 2.5 is going to bring the new bridge rules and a lot of balance changes. And of course, the reduction of the removal of wildcards from pre-mades and the 20 unique cards. So a lot of cool stuff coming. I would be interested to hear. Let me know in the comments, what do you think about the removal of wildcards from pre-mades? Are you a non-wildcard player that's excited to see that restriction? Are you a wildcard player that's going to be disappointed for that restriction? Are you a wildcard player that actually quite agrees with it and is okay with it? Let me know, because, you know, there's going to be different schools of thoughts depending on how you play the game currently. Right. Okay. That's a lot. My name's Bad as a Fish, and I'll look forward to seeing you again soon here in the Fish Tank.